Hey guys, it's Karen Marchetti. This time on Dual Process, Jody Robinson and I are working on a Curvy Lines quilt. So it's got a bunch of appliques, going in different directions. Looks really cool. So I can't wait to get started. I'm sure you have a printable. If not, go grab your printable and follow along with us. Hey guys, it's Karen. So I am ready to work on my more simple version on this, and it's gonna look yucky, and that's the best way I can say it. It's gonna look yucky as I'm drawing it because it's just a bunch of ink lines on this drawing. But what the plan I have is what it does is creates a whole bunch of texture. So I would use a really neutral thread, and I would just have it so it sinks into the background. Well, the whole quilt actually just becomes like a layer of texture on the quilt. So super fast, super easy. I'm going to assume I can probably get to here on one pass. I don't think this is real big. Well, at least in my mind, it's not that big. So I'm going to, start right here, and I'm just going to stitch some really random, just wavy lines. Doesn't matter. And then I'll stitch down my side, and I'll come back, and I don't necessarily want to echo it perfectly. I want it to be different each time so that it's just texture. And then I'd stitch down here, do another one, some really strong curves, some soft curves, and just repeat this all the way across the quilt as I go down. If you wanted them to all be exactly the same, you could just pick a real soft wave and then echo that each time. It depends what your personal preference is. Either of these will work just fine to create texture. And like that, you don't have to be exact. Let me change my color here. It's like this area right here. Whoops. This area right here where it's not exact, that actually adds a lot of visual interest. So it depends what you want and what look you want. So let me go back. Okay, I like it real random, so that's what I'm going to continue with, just real random lines. And part of the reason I like real random is if I make a mistake, no one knows. It's just some squiggly lines. So I'll continue this all the way until I need to roll. And it won't matter what side I'm on because I'm just going to leave my needle down and then advance the quilt. Okay. So then I would come down, finish this out. And with the wavy lines, you can make it any density you want to. If you wanted them real close for much more density, you can do that as well. So either way works. And the thing about like this right here, if you have a bunch of more dense lines and then some wider lines, these areas right here will actually become like little areas of relief where they're higher up than the dense quilting, and that adds even more texture. So let me just finish this up because I got one more option to show you. So like I said, it looks kind of yucky because this is just a thick ink on this photo of the quilt. If you were stitching it with real thread and a real quilt, it would just kind of sink in it. Unless you were using a contrasting thread, which you can if you want to, that's totally up to you. But if you were using a very neutral thread, it would just sink in. So the only other option with this is if we were to take this off and rotate the quilt and load it again, you can then, which If you know me, I hate reloading quilts, turning them. But some people really enjoy it, and the easiest way to make this into a cross grid would be to reload it. And then you would do this again in the other direction. And then you get this really cool, wonky kind of grid. Which again looks like a whole lot of ink, but really, that's because we're just drawing it. It just becomes really cool texture on the actual quilt. So that would be the other option if you wanted to make a really wonky grid. Let me turn this back around. So that's pretty much how I would do this. I would only go one direction because that's what my personal preference is. But if you wanted to do this wonky grid, super easy to do. So I'll see you back in a few minutes for my more complex version.
Hi everyone, it's Jody. For my Curvy Lines quilt, simple quilting plan, what I've decided to do is kind of just try to choose something that will be fairly fast to quilt, and that we can kind of work through, and kind of hit all the different things that we're going to quilt. And for me with this one, I feel like, with these curvy little sections and things, we want to probably try to create a little bit of movement in those. So what I've decided to do is add back and forth lines to each of these kind of, I guess I'll call them ribbons. But before we do that, looking at this quilt, the one thing that you'll notice is that, ideally you really don't want to have to, if you quilt down this one, then you kind of would have to tie off. So I usually try to plan so that I can figure out a way that I can quilt down here or whatever I'm doing in there, somehow travel through here to the next one or to a different area. So that's what we're going to do. And the thing that I kind of thought of that will enable us to do that is to just add a fill in these open areas. And you can leave it at just a plain fill to travel, any fill you like. I used on my drawing, I did loops. And then this is optional, but I did do it in mine, was to add some circles. And so I would chalk these in. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of mark them in here. Well, I'm just going to, let me change my color and we'll do it maybe a lighter color here. Let's see. We'll do yellow so it's not so much. So I'm just going to put some little circles, And this way, they don't need to be, any specific shape or size. That's totally up to you, what you decide to add in there. I kind of just evenly, space them out. Different sizes. And then we'll just quilt these while we're doing the fill. And one of the reasons I like to add some of these things is that you kind of get this whole other element to it in the quilting. And mainly because then any of these places where we just quilt these shapes, and I chose circles, you certainly could choose any shape you like. Maybe you love to use hexagons or something, you could use that in there as well. But everywhere that you put these is less space that you have to do this fill. And that always makes things go a little quicker. And if I can make it easier and add interest at the same time, I love that. So what we're going to do is, and I'm going to assume that we can reach probably, about halfway. So we'll do this top part and we'll go right to the top of this and then advance the quilt before we do any more. So let me go back to black here so we can see what I'm doing. So what I would do is I would start up here in the corner and I'm just going to do my little loops or any fill you like. When I come to one of these circles, I'll just go ahead and stitch it and then come out. There's another one, stitch it, do my loops, get myself back up to the top here. And then we're going to do those back and forth lines. So at this point, I will just go ahead and work my way down. The spacing is entirely up to you, or maybe you want to do ribbon candy. That's up to you. When I get to the bottom here, see, now I can come right out and continue on with my loops. Stitch my circle and keep right on going. Whoop. Stitch my circle. Keep going. At this point, I come right out, and I'm going to do the same thing. But clearly, when we look at this, now we know that we can't reach the entire section here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down, and I'm going to kind of stop right about in here so that we can come out and do the fill in the next section and not have to stop. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my back and forth here. I would probably do these ones a little farther apart just because the area is bigger. And see, at this point, I'll just jump right into this next area, do my loops, fill in all of this area as I go. Whoa, that's a little wiggly. Just keep going. Last one. And again, right in here, back and forth lines. Stop at the where we meet that crossing one. Come out. Do the same thing over here. And I'll just come up here, do this last one, and then that completes the first pass. So then I'll go ahead and advance my quilt. And now, honestly, I would probably not, I would just roll it a little bit, enough to work on this center part and go ahead and do that, because clearly by looking at this, you can see we are going to have to stop and start to do each side. So I would just advance enough, you know, well, I guess I would probably do as far as I can, because now at this point, ideally, I would like to do this one in one section. So we go ahead and start here. Now this this horizontal one, I'm going to do the opposite direction. So it's going to be back and forth lines like this. Now at this point, I probably would just, I mean, I'm here, so why not come down into here, do this. And then we're here. I can go ahead and do those back and forth lines again. Might have made those ones a little big, but. And then come out. Circle. I'm just going to repeat the same thing we did on the first pass to finish this. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the bottom of the quilt, and it's a little wiggly looking by drawing, but if you look at the actual drawing of the quilt, you can see, I mean, it really does. I think these wavy lines add some movement because your eye follows that wave of those back and forth lines, and then by using the fill, we're able to travel through this quilt a little easier than if you chose something else. So I hope you guys like that, and I will see you again for my more complex design.
Okay, so it's time for my more complex version. And with this one, I kind of need a little bit of a plan. So I'm going to, let me change my color pen. Oh, it doesn't matter, we'll use this. I'm going to add some chalk lines to remind me what I'm doing. And it's more of the direction I'm planning, because I'm going to load this quilt sideways. And the reason I choose to load it sideways is because, let me rotate this. I like to plan whatever, what's the word? So I want to plan the easiest way for me to quilt as much as I can without having starts or stops. And again, since I'm thinking this quilt, I can at least get this much in one pass, I'm loading it sideways because these are just filled sections in my plan, whereas these are straight sections where I want to continue the quilting. So that's why I decided to load it sideways. And again, the orange lines are just chalked. So the first thing I would do is, well, the first thing I probably would do would be ditch the whole thing, but we're going to save that until we're done because it helps to clean up the edges a little, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So the very first thing I would do is I'm going to echo these shapes like that, and then echo this shape like that. That's just giving me this little area of relief right here between whatever I do here and here. Okay, and you don't have to do one at a time. In real life, I would have echoed this and then just started my fill. And my fill is kind of bigger circles, so it's like pebble-ish, just larger pebbles. I just want to really fill that in with some circles. And you see I'm doing little half circles on the edge? That's because I like to make it look like my background fills are actually behind. So like this little half circle looks like it's behind that area of relief. It takes a little added extra, but I like the effect it creates. So I'm just going to fill this in. And like I said, some larger circles. You don't want them all to be the same size. That makes it very flat. And I like having all different textures. So I want tiny ones, I want medium size, I want larger. So again, I'll do the same thing over here. Just fill it in with these larger circles. And really any background fill that you're comfortable with would work. But sometimes it's good to practice and go out of our comfort zone. Okay, so now here's these chalk lines. That's letting me know that my curvies are going at least on this line from left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start here and make like a half circle. Now this is pretty big, so I'll go back and fill in there. And what I'm doing is I'm going like this and like this. I'm tucking my ends right on that line, and I'm making just a curve, so it just looks like this. Okay, if you need to put a chalk line down the center, so with the chalk line down the center, you're aiming here, so the furthest away point from where you started would be at that center line. And I hope I didn't confuse you, because when I just heard that out loud, that sounded very confusing. So I'm going to draw the curve and tuck it in, just along that seam line. So remember how I said I'm going to ditch after? So when I get here, then I will ditch this line, and it kind of cleans up any little messes that I made. Come back and ditch this line to here. So, but it gives that illusion of being curved. Okay, get rid of all this. So if this were a straight line, I'm just going to draw up here for a minute, and you did that center, it would look like this, where your furthest point that stretches out is always on that center line. And it gets easier the more you do it, but when you get really sharp curves like this one, that center line does help. So again, now this right here kind of messes you up, so you have to kind of create like an illusion. If this were straight, so like it would essentially do this. So what you need to do is just draw these lines like that. Just assume, just pretend like it were going all the way through. And then you continue this down the end of this curvy line. And again, ditch that so it's nice and clean on the edges. So then from here, I'm just going to sneak down here, and again do that little echo, and then go right into my fill. Fill that all in. Just making sure to vary the sizes to get the most texture. And of course, stitching pebbles or circles looks much prettier than drawing them. Okay, and then I'll tie off, and then I'll come over here on this side and do that same echo over here, 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 do the fill. And then I'll tie off. So now in this big open section, what I want to do is have those same curvies going down. So let me change colors. So I'm going to make that center line so that I know where to keep the widest point of my semi S curve. So I'm going to start here and go like this. I'm just going to come back and fill that in just so it's optically pleasing. And each one we're going to tuck in the end and try to keep my furthest point on that center line. So it's kind of like feathers when you do them on a curve. And this, I'm going to stitch along here and just fill in these ends. You have to kind of tighten up here and widen here, very similar to feathers around a corner. It just creates that illusion of movement. So from here, I will go back through and stitch in the ditch on that line, and then come down and stitch the ditch on this line. You can do it before. I on this method of fill, this curvy, you can even do it twice, because you just want that to be nice and clean. And actually, the more you stitch in there, yeah, you will get a little bit of thread buildup, but it kind of tucks in those loose ends if you missed a little. So then I would be ready to roll the quilt. So I'm going to roll the quilt from here. Oh, well, let me draw on this side because I already drew over there. I'm going to roll the quilt just a little bit because I just want to work on this section, okay? Because this one's going from right to left. So I'm going to start that same fill procedure method, however you want to call it. And I'm going from right to left. Tucking the ends in, traveling, tuck the ends in. And if you need that center line, you can chalk that as well. Just creating the illusion that these are dimensional and moving. So I like this design whenever it's like straight curvy lines like that, because it really does give that illusion that the line is, has depth to it, because the edges are deeper into the background than the front, and it really does look like it's moving. So again, then I will ditch this line, come down here and ditch this line just to clean up that edge. And then I will do the final roll on the quilt to finish down here. Same procedure, background fills, filling the stripes in the direction I've already noted, because sometimes I'll forget. So I'm going to continue filling this in, and I'll bring you back when I'm done. Okay, let me just flip this around. And there it is, all finished. I hope I didn't confuse you too much with all that talk about these curvy lines. They're actually a lot more simple than I babbled it into confusion for you, and I apologize. But again, it's super simple. You just, when you're doing the curves, just make a curve, and the end kind of has to go down the seam line, just like you would when you were tucking a feather in. So just like that. I hope I didn't make it more confusing than it is, because it really is awesome. Makes a great fill. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Have fun with it. And hey, if you do some of this quilting, feel free to post it and tag us in it. We would love to see it.
Hi, it's Jody. Now we are moving on to my more complex design for the Curvy Lines quilt. So for this more complex one, you'll notice that I've already marked with yellow lines that I want to stitch. Am I going to stitch right on them? Probably not. And that's fine. They're just a guide, so I know where they're going to be. And you'll also, so these more narrow ones, we're going to leave open between those, and we're going to add some fills. We're going to do one fill in these spaces that are next to these large ribbons, and then we're going to choose another fill to do this center. And what's going to happen is it's going to make these more narrow little bands stand up, because they're not going to be quilted, and it'll give like movement. And I really am not trying to make those echo out from these ribbons in a specific spacing or anything. I like them to be more kind of wonky and stuff because I think it adds to the movement. These ribbons in the quilt are not perfectly even either, so I think it just makes it I guess a lot more flowy looking. And what's going to happen is it's going to give the appearance that these ribbons pass underneath this center one and stuff like that. So knowing that, you can now see that, okay, this one really, the only thing that's more complex is that we're adding, I guess you would say tighter quilting, maybe more quilting for sure, but it's not any harder. Because the beauty of this is you just need to have 2 fills to fill in, one that'll be in all of those spaces and one that will be in all these spaces next to the ribbons. So maybe, you're not up to pebbles. I used pebbles and stippling. Maybe you're not there, like you don't like to do pebbles or you're not comfortable with your pebbles. You can just pick any 2 fills that you like, that you are comfortable doing, and it will give the same effect. It's really just for texture. So we're going to work across this one the same way as the simple version. And, doing what we can as we go. We can use these fills to travel. And then in the ribbons, what we're going to do is just a simple back and forth line. And it adds a really good dimension. It makes it look like they're moving, I think. So let me go ahead and switch back to black so we can see it good. And again, I'm going to start right up here in this top left corner. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch this. Then I'm going to go ahead and I did pebbles, but I'll just kind of do this little scribble so we get the effect of that. Go ahead and stitch this one. Now I'm going to travel along here to stitch this one. And then I did a meander in here, so it's a little more open, which is nice because the texture is going to be very different than the pebbling. Then I'll stitch this. And then I'm going to pebble down, but I really would like, well, it doesn't matter, I guess. I was going to say I'd like to get back to the top. I did the pebbling in here. We'll just do this nice and tight so you can tell the difference. And then right in here, I can go ahead and hop right in here. And what this is, I'm just simply bouncing back and forth in here. When I get to the top, I'll just repeat the process. I'm going to go ahead and stitch down here so I know where the pebbling is going to be, which is in here, nice and tight. Oh boy, this looks really messy. Stitch that. And I mean, since I'm doing meandering, I can just meander over to here to stitch this line. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my meander to fill the rest of this in. When we get to the bottom, we'll go ahead and stitch that other line to get up to the top. Stitch this one up. Do our pebbling. And then again, I can hop right into this one. Now we're only going to be able to do a part of it, but that's okay. Travel across the top. Pebbles back up. Ooh, that doesn't even want to fill in that tiny. Stitch this next line. Go ahead and do a little bit of a meander to get over here. Stitch this one. Then return to the bottom using the meander to get there. Uh-oh. Back up. Pebble down. It'll be a little neater than all of this, but and then it will bounce back up to the top from side to side. Sneak over here, stitch, tight fill up to the top, stitch the next line, use my little stitching to get over. So it's really, I mean, you know, it is more quilting, a little bit tighter, more dense quilting, but the difficulty that it's executed really is not any different. Sneak over here, stitch, do the tight fill, in here, down to here. I would now go ahead and advance the quilt, and I'm just going to repeat that entire process. I'm going to grab this part, and you know, I'll probably start from the bottom and go up, and then on this horizontal ribbon, I'm going to do them this direction, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this second pass. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the last pass. And as you can see, I mean, I think it really, yeah, I know it's kind of sloppy. It's so hard when you're drawing the little stuff on the screen. But you can see the movement, the textures, you know, the different textures even just add to that movement. So I hope you guys might give that a try. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope that you have enjoyed today's designs, and be sure to join us for the next episode of Dual Process.